Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. I can still hear the way she said it, like a verdict read by someone who'd already packed up the jury. We were in our small living room, where the soft light from the floor lamp made the walls look warmer than we felt. She stood with her hands tucked under her elbows and said I was emotionally distant. The sentence hovered between us like a slow ceiling fan, turning and turning, stirring the room without moving a thing. I should have argued. I should have asked for examples or offered my own. Instead, I nodded and said I'd try harder. It wasn't that I didn't feel anything. I felt everything. Work had been a grind for months, and my father's health had taken a dip that scared me more than I wanted to admit. I had learned to keep my worries folded like winter sweaters on a high shelf. To her, that quiet looked like apathy. To me, it was survival. After that night, something shifted. She laughed at different moments than before, laughed at messages that arrived late, laughed at a stranger's jokes that I could never hear. She brought up a coworker named Luke more often. He organized team lunches. He did impressions of the regional manager. He had a motorcycle he restored himself, which she mentioned as if the machine made him noble. When I asked what she liked about riding on it, she replied that she'd never been on the back. The way she said back made my stomach tighten, because it sounded like a plan she'd already scheduled. Life carried on with the usual routines. I made coffee before the sun came up. She scrolled through her phone with a smile that grew whenever a certain notification popped. On Saturdays, I mowed the small patch of yard while she ran errands and returned with new clothes that just happened to be on sale. At dinner, she asked only surface questions and reached for seconds without meeting my eyes. Her plate looked full, our table looked crowded, the space between us felt endless. The proof arrived the way ugly truths often do, abruptly and through a device that should have remained private. One evening, her phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower. The screen lit up with a preview that didn't try to hide itself. Last night felt right. Can't stop thinking about you. The contact photo was a blurry picture of a bar patio, but the name at the top was clear, Luke. A lot of stories burn at that moment. Mine cooled. My anger didn't shout, it sat down. I put the phone where I found it and stepped outside. The spring air smelled like damp earth. I walked past the fence, past our neighbor's rose bushes, to the end of the street where a stop sign stood bleeding red into the dusk. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I inhaled until my chest ached and realized something simple. I didn't need to fight for someone who had already left. She came out of the bathroom later, hair wrapped in a towel, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I asked about her day. She talked about meetings, about a new software update, about how Luke found a sandwich spot near the office that made real bread. She avoided my eyes. I avoided mentioning the message. We were two actors playing polite characters in a short drama that had already closed. The next afternoon, I took a drive. I headed nowhere in particular, letting the highway unwind beneath the tires. Somewhere just north of town, I found a lake I hadn't visited in years. Wind rippled the surface. Small boats nosed along the dock. I watched a father teach his daughter how to cast a line. Her first try dropped a foot from the pier. She grinned like she'd hit the moon. Something inside me loosened. I promised myself I would not spend the rest of my days as a supporting character in someone else's half-truth. When I returned home, I made dinner and set 2 plates. She came in late with a rehearsed apology about traffic and a quick drink after work. The words slid over me like rain on a jacket. I told her I hoped the drink was good. She waited for the accusation. I didn't. Give it. She studied my face, confused by the absence of a fight. Then she relaxed, satisfied that I was too timid or too in love to risk confrontation. That weekend, she announced she was going out with friends from the office. I wished her a safe night. She stared again, searching for jealousy. When she didn't find it, she left with a shrug and a glossy smile. I washed the dishes and thought about the lake. The next morning, I researched apartments near the water. Not fancy ones, just places with clean kitchens and windows that faced trees. On Monday, I called a therapist. I didn't want a vow of revenge. I wanted my center back. The therapist's office smelled like citrus and paper. We spoke about quiet people in a loud world, about how stillness can be mistaken for indifference, and how fear of conflict can look like coldness. He asked whether I'd told her what weighed on me. I admitted that I often tried to protect people from my storms and ended up building distance by accident. He nodded and said, "You can learn to share without drowning anyone." I left lighter than I went in. Days passed in a steady line. She stayed later at work, left earlier in the mornings, laughed into her phone with her back turned. I made copies of important documents, opened a new account at a local credit union, and boxed up photos that held better days. I wasn't running. I was clearing a path. The night I left, I told her dinner was on me. I picked up takeout from the place where we had celebrated our first raise, where the owner still called us the Tuesday couple. I laid everything on the table and poured water into 2 tall glasses. When she came home, she smiled at the sight of it and kissed my cheek, a mechanical gesture that felt like a reflex from a bygone year. We ate. We talked about anything except us. When we finished, I stood, gathered the plates, and said I had something to share. Her posture stiffened as if bracing for a hurricane. I thanked her for the good times, for the road trips and small milestones. I told her I knew about Luke. I told her I wouldn't be raising my voice or listing every detail. I simply didn't want to live in a home where I became a shadow while someone else stood in my place. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The shock in her eyes wasn't about being discovered. It was about hearing calm where she expected chaos. She said I had misunderstood. I said I hadn't. She said I was overreacting. I said I wasn't. She waited for pleading, for a promise to change, for some bargain I would make to keep her. I didn't bargain. I told her the lease was in both our names through the end of the month, and I'd pay my part while I found a new place. I wished her well at work. I picked up my overnight bag, the one I'd hidden in the back of the closet, and walked toward the door. "Wait," she said, not loud, just startled. "You're leaving? Just like that?" I turned. "I'm leaving because I deserve a life that feels honest. So do you." She wanted a fight. She got quiet. I stepped outside and felt the cool evening wrap around me like fresh air after a long meeting. The door clicked shut, not with anger, but with certainty. My first night in the new apartment smelled like paint and possibilities. The place had a narrow balcony that overlooked a row of maple trees. Cars hummed on the avenue. A dog barked 2 buildings over. Someone played a piano piece soft enough to sound like rain. I set a mattress on the floor and fell asleep in a room that didn't carry her perfume or our broken history. The next morning I ran around the lake. The path curved past benches, past joggers, past old couples who walked hand in hand. The sky held that pale blue that belongs only to early mornings. Every inhale felt like starting over. My chest burned in a good way. I went home, cooked eggs, and made a list of goals that didn't include winning anyone back. Learn to cook something complicated once a week. Visit my dad every Sunday. Volunteer at the community center on Thursdays. Speak up when I'm hurt, even if my voice shakes. Keep boundaries like I keep promises. Weeks became a new rhythm. Work stopped feeling like a shield and started feeling like craft again. I rediscovered the joy of building something clean. Slides that told clear stories, proposals that didn't oversell, results that stood on their own. I took a woodworking class at the community college on Tuesday nights. My first project was a simple coffee table, sanded smooth, stained the color of toasted bread. I ran my fingers over the finished surface and thought about how peace often looks like a well-made edge. Not sharp, just precise. Friends reappeared in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus invited me to a baseball game and handed me a ticket with a grin that said, "Welcome back." Priya asked me to dog sit over a weekend. Her retriever snored like a tiny freight train and followed me from room to room. Even casual conversations at the grocery store felt brighter. A neighbor offered extra tomatoes from her garden, and we talked about recipes that taste like summer. Through it all, I never posted cryptic quotes or played detective. I blocked no one and said nothing cruel. Revenge had been transformed into something quieter, a refusal to carry bitterness. When people asked where she was, I answered simply that we'd gone separate ways. Some were surprised. Some nodded with the understanding that comes from their own hard stories. I noticed how often strangers mistake calm for emptiness. What I felt wasn't empty. It was steady. One afternoon, I visited my father. He sat by the window, reading the sports section with a magnifier. We ate lemon bars from a bakery near the lake and watched a game in comfortable silence. He looked over and said, "You look lighter." I told him I was working on it. He tapped my shoulder and said that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to chase what's running away. Months ticked by. I learned to make gumbo that tasted close to the bowl my grandmother served when I was 10. I planted basil in a windowsill box and pinched the leaves with more patience than I'd ever given a plant before. The therapist helped me find language for things I used to hide behind jokes or silence. He told me healing moves like a tide. Sometimes it rolls out so far you think it's gone, then it returns when you need it most. I listened, then walked to the lake and let the idea prove itself true. Every now and then I saw a motorcycle streak down the boulevard and wondered if it was Luke's. The thought lasted as long as a car horn, then disappeared. Not everything needs a response. Not every echo deserves a reply. The first snow fell in a hush that made the city look kinder. I brewed hot chocolate and set the mug on my handmade table. The apartment glowed from a lamp I'd found at a thrift store. I sat there listening to the quiet, realizing I hadn't thought about her all day. That wasn't triumph. It was freedom. A simple, ordinary kind that doesn't demand applause. I went to bed grateful for sheets that smelled like laundry soap and winter air. I didn't know what would arrive next. I only knew the storm had passed and the water was finally calm enough to reflect the sky. I didn't see her again for months. By the time the seasons had shifted from crisp autumn winds into the biting cold of winter, my life had already taken a new shape. Each morning began with quiet rituals, boiling water for coffee, stretching by the balcony doors, sometimes scribbling thoughts into a notebook that was slowly filling with reflections I once kept hidden even from myself. That new apartment had become more than just four walls. It was proof that I could start over. Proof that leaving without shouting or begging wasn't weakness. It was strength in disguise. I had discovered that silence carried a power she never understood. But peace doesn't mean the past vanishes. It lingers, testing you at unexpected times. The first test came one snowy evening as I left the hardware store, carrying supplies for my latest project, a bookshelf. I stepped into the icy parking lot, breath rising in little clouds, when I spotted a figure walking quickly toward the entrance. For a split second I thought my mind was playing tricks, but it wasn't. It was her. She didn't see me, bundled in her scarf, head bent against the wind. She walked past so close I could smell the same perfume she always wore, that faint vanilla and rose scent. My stomach clenched, but then something strange happened. The wave of hurt I expected never came. Instead, there was calm curiosity, like bumping into a character from a book you once read and realizing their story no longer mattered to your own. I didn't call her name. I didn't follow. I placed my supplies in the truck, drove home, and built my bookshelf that night with music playing in the background. Every nail I hammered into the wood felt like a declaration. The past has no claim here. Weeks rolled on. I filled the bookshelf with novels I had always meant to read. I invited friends over for a simple dinner, laughter bouncing off walls that once knew only quiet. Marcus brought a new board game. Priya showed up with her dog and a bottle of sparkling cider. We sat around that handmade table and played late into the night, the dog curled up under my feet. At one point, Marcus leaned back and said, "Man, you look good, happier, like you finally came up for air." He was right. I felt lighter, as if my old self, the one who used to shrink into silence whenever accused of being distant, was slowly learning how to stand tall without apology. Then, one afternoon in early spring, she called. Her number lit up my phone while I was sanding another project on the balcony. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. The choice surprised me. I swiped to accept, not from longing, but from sheer curiosity. Her voice trembled at first. "Hey, it's me." I simply replied, "Yeah, I know." There was a pause. Then she said she'd been thinking a lot, that she owed me an explanation, that maybe we could meet for coffee. She spoke quickly, like someone who feared being cut off before finishing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask questions. I told her I was busy, and it was true. I had plans to meet my father that evening. She pressed, insisting it would only take a few minutes. I said calmly, "I don't think that's a good idea." Her tone shifted, growing sharper. "You're really not even going to hear me out," I answered with honesty. "There's nothing to hear. You made your choice. I made mine." Silence filled the line. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't think you'd actually walk away." I said, "That's because you never believed I deserved better, but I do. I already have better." And with that, I ended the call. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't ache. I felt steady, like the ground under my feet was finally mine again. Days later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned she wasn't doing so well. Apparently, Luke, the coworker, had moved on. She had been left in the same silence she once gave me. The irony wasn't lost, but I didn't dwell on it. Revenge wasn't in watching her crumble. My revenge was in the life I'd built without her. By summer, that life bloomed in ways I hadn't expected. I'd signed up for weekend hikes with a local outdoor group. I learned the trails around the lake, discovered hidden waterfalls, and made friends who loved mornings as much as I did. I took photographs of sunrise views that painted the sky in orange and lavender, colors I had never paused to notice back when I was just surviving. One of those hikes led me to Claire. She wasn't someone who tried to shine brighter than anyone else. She was simply present, laughing easily, asking thoughtful questions, listening in a way that made conversations feel like shared space instead of competitions. We talked as we walked, and when the group stopped to rest, she sat beside me and handed me half of her granola bar without hesitation. I didn't feel the old nervousness of needing to perform or prove myself. Around her, I was simply me. For the first time in years, that felt enough. Claire and I started seeing each other casually, coffee after hikes, small lunches on her breaks. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. It wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about finding someone who valued honesty, who didn't confuse quiet with absence. Meanwhile, my ex tried reaching out again, emails, short messages, even once showing up at my old apartment before realizing I'd moved. Each time I ignored the attempts, not out of spite, but because I'd already written the last page of that chapter. Her presence no longer stirred anything but indifference. And in that indifference was the sweetest form of revenge. Because while she was realizing the depth of what she lost, I was living days filled with peace she never imagined I could build. My evenings were no longer heavy with suspicion or disappointment. They were full of good meals, real laughter, long runs by the water, and plans for tomorrow that didn't carry anyone else's betrayal on their back. I had become someone new, someone stronger, quieter, but not distant. Someone who knew how to sit with stillness and call it peace, not emptiness. And as the month stretched on, I understood the truth. She wasn't even a memory anymore. She was just a story I once lived, a chapter that closed without a single plea. And the best part? I had never felt more free. By the time a full year had passed since I walked out that door, my life no longer resembled the one I had left behind. The new routines had settled into something more permanent. The apartment had gone from bare walls and hand-me-down furniture to a place that carried my fingerprint in every corner. The table I had built, the bookshelf lined with my favorite novels, plants stretching toward sunlight, photographs of hikes and friends pinned up like quiet celebrations. Peace had stopped being a goal and had become the natural rhythm of my days. I woke early because I wanted to, not because stress pushed me out of bed. I read before sleep, cooked meals I actually enjoyed, and spent time with people who filled conversations with laughter instead of tension. The absence of drama wasn't boring, it was freedom. And then one afternoon, she showed up. I was at a local cafe, sipping coffee and flipping through a book, when she walked in. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked worn, like someone carrying too many nights of regret on too little rest. She noticed me instantly. Her eyes widened, the way someone stares at a ghost they thought they'd never see again. She walked over, hesitated, then sat down across from me without asking. "You look different," she said quietly. I set my book aside and replied simply, "I feel different." There was a long silence. She glanced at my coffee, at the open pages, at the easy way I sat there, calm and steady. Finally, she whispered, "I made a mistake." Her voice cracked with sincerity, but instead of anger or longing, I felt something else entirely, distance. Not the distance she once accused me of, but the kind born from growth, the kind that comes when you've walked so far ahead that turning back isn't even possible. "I know," I said, not unkindly, "but that mistake doesn't belong to me anymore." Her eyes filled, searching for some trace of the man who would plead, who would bargain, who would promise to change if it meant keeping her. but that man was gone. In his place sat someone who had rebuilt his life brick by brick, piece by piece, until peace became his greatest revenge. She asked if we could ever try again. I shook my head. You're a part of my past. I've moved on, truly. The finality in my voice seemed to shatter something in her. She nodded slowly, stood up, and walked out of the cafe, disappearing. Into the afternoon crowd. For the first time, I realized she was no longer a wound, no longer even a scar. She was just gone. I finished my coffee, picked up my book, and returned to my quiet, beautiful life. Later that evening, I met Claire for dinner, and as we laughed over a meal, I thought about how far I had come. My ex had finally realized the depth of what she lost, but by then, she was only a ghost in a story that no longer defined me. The best revenge was never anger or spite. It was this, living a life so full, so calm, so authentically mine, that she wasn't even a memory anymore. And that, I realized, was the kind of ending that didn't need any more words.